Pesachim, Aleph Dalet.
Aleph Dalet. Remeus says we may eat chametz the entire 5th hour, and we must burn it at the onset of the 6th hour. But Rabbi Yehuda says we may eat chametz the entire 4th hour, but we suspend the entire 5th hour, and we must burn it at the onset of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda also said 2 loaves of a Thanksgiving offering which had become unfit were placed on the roof of the portico. As long as they lay there, all the people would eat chametz. When one was removed, they were suspended. When they would neither eat nor burn the chametz. When both were removed, all the people would begin to burn their chametz. Rabbi Gamliel says non-consecrated chametz may be eaten the entire 4th hour. Truma, which is chametz, may be eaten the entire 5th hour, and we must burn all chametz at the onset of the 6th hour. Rabbi Kanina, administrator of the Kohanim, says in all the days of the Kohanim, never did they refrain from burning sacrificial meat that had been contaminated by a secondary tumah together with sacrificial meat that had been contaminated by a primary tumah. Although, by so doing, they added contamination to its contamination. Rabbi Akiva added, saying that in all the days of the Kohanim, never did they refrain from lighting oil that had become unfit through contact with a tel yom in a lamp that had been contaminated by a corpse. Although by doing so, they added contamination to its contamination.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this Mishnah leads on into the next one, because now we've set the stage for saying what appears to be a general rule, that if something is going to be burned anyway, then it doesn't matter if you're adding tumah, if you're increasing the degree of tumah. So now Rabbi Meir makes a conclusion from this. Amar Rabbi Meir, mi divrei hem lamatnu, shesorfim truma tahora im atamea b'Pesach. So therefore, when it comes to the time for burning chametz, you can burn tahor truma along with tamei truma, right? Because either way, it's all going to be burned. So what do we care if it becomes tamei? Amalo Rabbi Yossi, eina hi amida. Sorry, that's crossing the line. All these cases that the cases that we brought before in the previous Mishnah between Rabbi Chanina, Skana Kwanim, and Rabbi Akiva was all cases where something was already tamei just with a lesser degree of tumah, and now you're increasing the degree of tumah. But now you're taking two things that are being burned for different reasons. One is the truma tamei, which has to be burned just because it's truma tamei, and then you've got chametz truma, which is tahor, which is being burned because it's Pesach. And you can't mix the two. According to Rabbi Yossi. Modim Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Now Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua disagree about some things, but in this particular case they agree. Shesorfin zola atma v'zola atma. So they say, like Rabbi Yossi says, that you have to burn them separately. You burn your truma tamei separately from your truma tahora on Erev Pesach. Alman nechelku. So what is the machlokes between the two of them? Al hataluya v'al tamea. It's about if you have truma which is suspended. Suspended meaning that it's safek tamei. So you can't eat it, but you can't burn it. If it's something is safek tamei, you can't during the rest of the year you can't eat it and you can't burn it. V'al tamea. And now you've got truma that's vadei tamei. So normally the rest of the year you wouldn't be allowed to mix the two, but now it comes to Erev Pesach and you want to burn them all together. Rabbi Eliezer tisaref zol atma v'zol atma. He maintains his position that they need to be burned separately. Rabbi Yeshua shtehen ka'achas. Now the safek of the truma teluya can be combined with the fact that it needs to be burned anyway, and you can put them all into one pile. So his reasoning, as Kahati explains it, is that since there's already a safek of tumah in it, we have no particular need to be careful about its level of tumah. Only if it's vada tahor do we have to be careful not to let it become tamei. But in this case, no, we'll let it become tamei because they're going to be burned together. Okay. Perik base. Anytime that it's permitted for humans to eat chametz on Erev Pesach, machil lebehema. So then he can also feed it to his animal. So then you can feed it to animals, to wild creatures, to birds. And he can also sell it to a non-Jew. And of course, he's allowed to derive benefit from it. As soon as the time has passed, to eat it. In other words, we're now at the beginning of the 6th hour. Asur b'hanasa, you're no longer allowed to benefit from it. You can't even light an oven or a stove using it. It's time for burning it. And now you might have thought, it seems like an obvious statement, because obviously burning it is in a stove is considered a hana. So I saw a parish on this actually in the article about why this is why we have to have this in here. It's about Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says ein biur chametz ela streifa, right? So Rabbi Yehuda says that there's only one way of burning, of getting rid of this chametz, and that is by streifa. It's got a din of streifa, and that's the only thing you're allowed to do with it. So now normally we have a din that if something has got a din of streifa, then once it has been burned, then the ashes are mutter. And we said that was I don't know if you recall this, but we also had this in our kashrus classes. We were talking about basa b'chalav. The din of basa b'chalav is that it has to be buried. Right. And burying and burning have their each one has a chumrah and a kula. Is that if something has a din of streifa, then it has to be utterly destroyed. But on the other hand, once it's done, the ashes are permitted. You can use the ashes for whatever you might want to use ashes for. But if something it needs to be buried, then even if you burn it, the ashes are still prohibited and have to be buried. Yeah. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the mitzvah is dafka with burning, then he would hold that the ashes are fine. But even so, the burning process itself is still asur, and only when it's been reduced to ashes is the chametz permitted. Okay. They say it's also acceptable to crumble it and to scatter it to the sea, or throw it into scatter it and throw it into the wind, or to throw it into the sea. And I mean, there's a question: do you have to crumble it if you're going to throw it into the sea? And lahalacha, we say like the chachamim that ideally you should burn it. That is the custom to burn chametz, but that's not the only way. So we don't say like Rabbi Yehuda that that's the only way to do it, because let's say you discover some chametz on first day Yom Tov and you can't burn it. Right. Okay. Then you have alternatives. You can flush it down the toilet, all right? Or you can crumble it and throw it into the air. Or if you happen to live on the beach, you can take it and throw it into the sea. If it's big pieces that, however, that won't dissolve so easily in the sea, then you do need to crumble it before, so that it is properly destroyed by going into the sea. Okay. Right. Chametz shel nochri. If a non-Jew owned chametz she'avar alav Pesach, and he owned it during Pesach, mutar b'hana. That's 100% okay, because there's no din that a nochri has to get rid of his chametz. B'shel Yisrael, however, if it's a Jew, asur b'hana, then if a Jew owned a chametz over Pesach, then it becomes prohibited for any kind of benefit. Shneimar v'lo yera'a lecha se'or. So it's dafka you as a Jew. Since there's a love in the Torah that a Jew is not allowed to have any kind of chametz during Pesach, so Chachamim made a knas, so that even after Pesach it should also be asur. So the din of chametz she'avar alav Pesach is a din d'Rabbanan, which of course is a din. But it's something that's a specific penalty for a Jew who failed to sell his chametz over Pesach. Okay.
All right.
Yep. Erevin test base. sorry, what am I saying? Erevin is
Erevin is
I didn't refresh. Yes, it is test base.
this bait. If a large group is adjacent to a small one, the large one is permitted, but the small one is prohibited. If a large courtyard was breached into a small one, the large one is permitted, but the small one is prohibited, because it is like the entrance to a larger one. If a courtyard was breached into a public domain, one who brings from there into a private domain is from a private domain into it is liable. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. For the comments say from into the public domain or from the public domain. No, I'm saying this wrong. But the sages say from into the public domain or from the public domain into it is not liable, because it is like a carmelis. In a courtyard was breached into a public domain on one or two sides. And if a house was breached on one or two sides, or an alley cross beams or poles were removed, they are permitted on the Sabbath, but prohibited in the future. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi says they are permitted on that Sabbath, and they are permitted in the future, and they are prohibited in the future, and they are prohibited on the Sabbath. Now we had this house before. We had this house, both of these houses before, in the previous Mishnah.
I didn't follow you.
And we have these two diagrams before.
The same two, you're saying?
Yeah. Didn't we have them before? Maybe I'm wrong.
Rabbi Yehuda versus Rabbi Yossi. Yes, we were talking about Rabbi Yehuda versus Rabbi Yossi in Pesachim. That's correct. Or was it? Is that right? Was it Rabbi Yehuda and Yehuda versus? It was Rabbi Meir versus Rabbi Yossi in today's Mishnah. Yes, we did see Rabbi Yehuda was talking about the beer and streifa.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Rav Roshi says they are permitted on that Sabbath, but they are permitted in the future, and they are prohibited in the future. They are prohibited on the Sabbath. A secondary story built upon two houses or bridges under which a road passes, one may carry beneath them on Shabbos. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, but the comment prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda also says we may make an erev for an open alley, but the sages prohibit it.
Okay. Shabbos kaf beis hey.
One who bathes in the water of a cave or in the water of Tiberias and dried himself even at 10 towels may not carry them in his hand, but 10 people may dry themselves with one towel, their faces and hands, their feet, and may carry them in their hands. We anoint and massage the stomachs, but we may not neither knead nor scrape the skin. We may not go down to kardima, nor take an emetic, or straighten an infant's limbs or set a fracture. If one's hands or foot became dislocated, one may not massage them with cold water, but may bathe them according to his usual manner, and he is healed. He is healed. A person may borrow pitchers of water or pitchers of oil from his friend, provided he does not say to him, "Lend me." In the same manner, a woman may borrow loaves of bread from a friend. If she does not trust him, he may leave his cloak with him and make a reckoning with him after Shabbos. So too in Yerushalayim, when the day before Pesach falls on the Sabbath, one may leave his clothes with him and take his Pesach with him. May take his Pesach offering and make a reckoning with him after Yom Tov. A person may count his guests and desserts.
That's it. That's it. We've done 3. And Master Sheni Gimel Yud.
If what was brought with Maisa Sheni money becomes unclean and may be redeemed, Rabbi Yehuda says it must be buried. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, if Maisa Sheni itself rendered unclean and may be redeemed, then what was brought with Maisa Sheni money should certainly be redeemable. He said to them, not so. If you are so concerning Maisa Sheni itself, which when clean may be redeemed as a distance, will you say concerning that this brought with Ma'aser Sheni of one will you say so concerning that bought with Ma'aser Sheni money which when clean may not be redeemed at a distance? If Ma'aser Sheni was, I'm sorry.
Then comes at three. Yeah.
If a deer brought with Ma'aser Sheni money died, it must be buried with its hide. Reb Shimon says it may be redeemed if one bought it alive and slaughtered it and became unclean. It must be redeemed. Reb Yossi said it must be buried. It must be buried if one bought it slaughtered and it became unclean. It is like produce. And if one lends jars from Ma'aser Sheni, though he sealed them, the Ma'aser does not acquire. If he poured into them without specifying before he sealed them, Ma'aser Sheni does not acquire. After he sealed them, after he had sealed them, Ma'aser Sheni acquires. Before he sealed them, they are offset in 101. After he sealed them, they render holy any quantity. Before he seals them, he may set aside truma from one for all, and after he sealed them, he must set aside for each one. I can't talk today.
Shesh. Venn diagrams that are concentric circles.
Yeah. Okay, Vav Gimel. Every object that contracts treading, but Tuma must.
Wait. No, it's above. We're on Vav Vav.
Why did I put that there? Every growth that is subject to pay is subject to tithes, but there can be a growth that's subject to tithes but is not subject to pay. Every animal that is subject to rishis hagaz is subject to the priestly gifts, but there can be an animal that is subject to the priestly gifts but not subject to rishis hagaz. Every growth that is subject to a beer is subject to shavias, but there can be a growth that is subject to shavias but not subject to beer. Beit Shammai says a Yisrael may not be invited to join with a Kohen in a Bakor. Beis Hillel says, however, permits it, and even a non-Jew. If a Bakor suffers from a congestion of blood, even if he will die, he may not be bled. These are the words of Reb Yehuda. The sages, however, say he may let its blood, provided he does not inflict a blemish upon it, and if he didn't inflict a blemish upon it, he may not be slaughtered on its account. Upon it, it may not be slaughtered on its account. Reb Shimon says he may bleed it even though he inflicts a blemish upon it.
In fact, the halakha follows Rabbi Shimon here that if he does, if the animal needs a bloodletting to save its life, and that turns out to make a mum on it, then they can say, "Oh, fabulous! So the animal survived, and now it's a bal mum, so now we can shecht it."
Okay, if one slits the ear of a bakor, he may never be slaughtered. These are the words of Rebbe Eliezer, and the sages say when it develops another blemish, he may slaughter it in its own account. It happened that an old ram was dangling hair that question spotted it. He said, "What is the reason for this?" He said to him, "He is a bakor, and it may be not slaughtered unless he has a blemish." Whereupon he took a dagger and slit its ear. The matter came before the sages and permitted it. When he saw that they had permitted it, he went again and slit the ears of other bakors, and they prohibited it. Once children were playing in the field, and they tied the tail of one of them to another. The tail of one of them was torn off, and it was found to be a bakor. The matter came before the common, and they permitted it. Whenever they saw that they had permitted it, they went and tied together the tails of other bakor, and they prohibited it. This is the rule: whenever it is done with knowledge is prohibited, and whatever is knowledgeable without knowledge is permissible. When Kor was pursuing him, and he kicked it and inflicted a blemish upon it, he may slaughter on account of it. For all blemishes that can be inflicted by man, shepherds who are Yisraelim are believed, but shepherds who are Kohanim are not believed. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says he is believed concerning his friends Bakor, but he is not believed concerning his own name. Rabbi Yehuda says one who is suspect concerning a thing may neither judge nor testify about it.
And the halach is like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that a kohen shepherd can be believed about the bechor of another kohen. Okay. Gets in base vav.
If a minor received it and then became of age, or a deaf mute and then he became of age, or a blind person and then he became of age because I'm able to see. I'm sorry, I really messed this up. If a minor received it and then became of age, or a deaf mute and he then became able to hear, or a blind person and he became able to see, or a mentally deranged person and he then became sane, or a Gentile and he then became a proselyte, or a Gentile and he then became a proselyte, and he is not valid. However, if it was a hearing person who received it and then he became deaf mute, and then regained his hearing, or a seeing person and he then became blind and then regained his sight, or a sane person and then became mentally deranged and then regained his sanity, he is valid. But the general rule, anyone who is mentally impaired at the beginning and at the end is valid. Even those women who are not trusted to say her husband died are trusted to bring a get. Her mother-in-law, her mother-in-law's daughter, her co-wife, her husband's brother, wife, and her husband's daughter. What is the difference between a get and the testimony of death? That the written document is evidence. The woman herself may bring her own get, and she must say, "It was written in my presence and signed in my presence." A get which is written without specific intent for a specific woman is void. How is it exemplified? If a man was passing through the street and heard the sound of scribes dictating, "So and so is divorcing so and so from such and such a place," and he said, "This is my name and this is my wife," and he said, "This is my name and this is my wife," of course he is void for executing divorce, which is divorce his wife. He may change his mind. And a man of the city met him and said to him, "My name is like your name and my wife's name is like your name's name." It is void for executing a divorce with it. Moreover, if he had two wives whose names were alike and he wrote a get to divorce the eldest, he cannot divorce the younger with it. Moreover, if he said to the scribe, "What is write a get? I will divorce whichever one I want, and I will avoid and it is void for executing a divorce with it."
From which we learn that the get has to be written very specifically for a specific man and a specific wife of his, and it cannot be transferred. A get is non-transferable. Okay. Zeho.
My lips are sticking together from the medicine I had to take, so I can't.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So that my lips are sticking together from the medicine that I had to take. So
oh,
I was.
Before Shlema.
Anyway, thank you. Tomorrow I have a technician coming. Now they said between 8 and 12, which could mean 1 o'clock, could mean Thursday. So I have no idea, but we'll start and we'll see.
We'll take our chances.
Take our chances. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a